Tell me
Thanks,
when you're just the
thanks
thumbs
so
up.
much for this, guys. Thank you.
Okay, first thing I'd like to welcome everybody to the Gemara shir on Bava Kamma. This shir is dedicated to Gavin Stollar's late mom Sylvia, Rachel Bas Levi, and I think she'd be very, very proud of his son. I mean, I'm certain her son. I'm very proud of Gavin. He's come a huge way. And from what I understood, Gav, your mom came from initially a religious family. And in Shemaim, where she's got clarity, she'd be exceptionally proud of you. Exceptionally proud of you. And I want to thank Kevin Mayerthal for coming, because Kevin actually knew your mom. I didn't have the merit to know your mom.
I didn't. No.
But we both love you very much, Gavin, and we're very, very sorry that your mom has passed away. And we just want to thank you for bringing this up to our attention.
And thanks very much for accommodating it. I appreciate it.
Pleasure. So obviously in the merit of Rachel Bas Levi, we're doing the Gemara shir. Michael Kupovitz, I'm sure would have wanted to be here today. He's not well, so he'll be listening to the shir afterwards, but I'm sure his thoughts are with you, as is ours. And we're going to proceed from this point. What I'm going to just do, let's just put in the video and then minimize everything. Okay, so I see that the top of my head isn't being taken away. All right. So Arthur quite rightly said to us, well, where are we in the Gemara shir? Because sometimes I have a bad habit of not introducing the page. Subsequently, Arthur and I have done some work to relabel. Guys, can you put your phone off? Just
that was mine. Sorry.
No
Silent
problem.
off.
Well, something that you're not going to look at it, because the reality is we need to concentrate on learning.
Yeah.
This is a joke for Gavin's mom. This is something serious.
Yeah.
So I'm even putting as my phone, not that the phone's ringing business at the moment. Business is very quiet. But in any event, let's get to it. So,
James, let's do the brachot before we start.
That's a very, very good point. Let me just go onto this. So there's the brachot for the davening is found on page 17 of the Art Scroll. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'suk b'divrei Torah. V'aritna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu u'fi v'cha Beit Yisrael v'niyeh anachnu v'tze'etzenu v'tze'etzei amcha Beit Yisrael kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Torah lishma. Baruch atah Adonai Hamlamed Torah le'amo Yisrael. Amen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'cha banu mikol amim v'natan lanu Torato. Baruch atah Adonai notenu Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay. So we on Gemara in Bava Kamma 3b4 in the Schottenstein notes. The reason why I like the Schottenstein more than Sefaria, although Sefaria is a wonderful work, is that it's more specific in terms of the which Amud we on. So we're on Amud Bet section 3. So how we ended off last time was discussing that the verses do not precisely fit with the exposition of this master or that master. What we were talking about is the master being Rav and the master being Shmuel. Because what actually was determined here was as follows, is that both of them used a conceptual application instead of a word-for-word source. So the Mishnah neither says Nevi'eh or Boeh, it says Maveh. Now it's not that they weren't accurately applying the word by using a different word. What they were trying to use is a conceptual link to have the scriptural link. We've learned so far the Gemara and the Mishnah according to Rav. So Rav said as follows, that under ox there are three primary categories. There's Keren, Shane, and Regel. Are you with me on? And then Gavin wanted to say last time it didn't make sense that Maveh was related to Shane. But if we learn the Mishnah according to Shmuel, what we'll determine is that when it mentions the primary damages of the Mishnah, it mentions ox in reference to, according to Rav Yehuda's explanation of Shmuel, ox is in reference to Keren, and therefore Maveh is free for Shane. In other words, because it's very different, Keren and Shane are very different from each other, you are entitled to use Maveh for Shane. Does that make sense?
What is
So now I want to ask you something. Can I interrupt for 1
Sorry.
second?
Sure.
So Rabbi Yehuda, okay, falls under Shmuel, okay, which I
Yes.
understand. Okay, I've got it now, so that's clear. The second thing I wanted to ask you is, do they want it? Is Rabbi? No, he wasn't a rabbi. Was Shmuel? Did he want to not have separate categories for Shane and Maveh? Did he want to join them into one category?
Okay, so this is what we're going to see. We might have to do a Zoom share after this, just for the simple reason that hopefully, remember before we generally kept it to one Zoom share when it was a simple thing. Sometimes what we did afterwards is Arthur edited it. So when we uploaded it, we said it in a way that wasn't repeating things and confusing, because this is a new concept for you guys. Unfortunately, Kevin joined at the part at which it got confusing. So Fridays was very smooth. Now we're going to deal with a completely issue that's thrown this off its axis. So what are you saying? Pardon?
What is Mavi in a simplified terms? I haven't done this for quite some time, so I've forgotten what that was.
Mavi, that's great. So what we're going to do is as follows. Mavi was, we didn't know what it was when it said it in the opening Mishnah. For everything else, it was clear. So what it said is ox, hashor. It said habor, referring to the pit. Mavi, it had a question mark, and it had have, which meant fire. Okay, not aish, because aish is a single flame. And we didn't know what Maveh meant. It wasn't explained at the time. So last time what we went through is Maveh, according to Rav, meant the damage caused by man. And the two subcategories of the damage caused by man proposed to Bava Kamma was either man when he was sleeping or man when he was awake. And it came to prove that whether man is sleeping or awake, he's fully liable for payment, because he should know sleep is uncontrollable and therefore should put away items that are delicate, like on his pedestal, etc., if he's staying at somebody else's Shabbos. And then it said, another opinion in the Gemara, that man's mucus or spit that comes from man is a torda of man. So again, man is the primary category. According to one opinion, man sleeping was the torda of man. And according to another opinion in the Gemara, man's spit or mucus was also torda of man. And we learned that whether the torda or the primary category referred to as man is damages, we are fully responsible. In other words, a mucus is a projectile of man, but because it comes from man's body, if it damages something, like you're eating mulberries and you're spitting, and that lands on a girl's white dress, you have to replace the dress. It doesn't matter whether you ripped the dress or your body created that damage. You're equally responsible, just like a sleeping person is equally responsible if they damage something in their sleep, because they should have known that in their sleep they have no control. So the torda and the av is expressly mentioned in scriptural source as being man. The torda is anything that's not mentioned in scriptural source. So both the tordas of man, whether it's the mucus or man sleeping, compared to man that does the damage himself while awake, are equal in the fact that you make full payment. So that is the opinion of Rav, who said that Maveh means man. Now Shmuel, we learned that Maveh is referring to Shane, the tooth of the animal. And this is not a contradiction, because it says the ox is not like the Maveh, and Maveh is not like the ox. These are the living things, which is unlike fire, which is not living. And then we said that ox, Maveh, and fire are animate and moving, whilst pit is stationary. So what we're saying is that, according to Shmuel, the tooth of an animal does constitute man. Tooth of an animal does constitute ox. The reason being is ox is a living creature, and the tooth, which is an anatomy of the animal, comes from a living thing. Just like Rav said that mucus of a man comes from a living man. It doesn't matter if it's the anatomy or your spit, etc. It's part of a living creature. So Shmuel is correct there also. is that ox is living, and therefore tooth, that's the anatomy belonging to a living creature, can constitute maveh, because the Mishnah said a maveh is living, or the anatomy or the product of a living. So far, we see that Shane, we learned before that Shane, all the toldos of Shane are exactly the same as the Av of Shane, meaning you get physical, the animal gets physical gratification. So any of the toldos where the animal rolls itself in the hay, apart from the Av, which is the eating, the animal enjoying himself from eating. If an animal is rolling in the hay or rubbing its back against the wall, which fell over to satisfy an itch, these are conceptually the tolda the same as the Av, meaning the Av is a scriptural reference of an animal eating. And therefore, the toldos and the Av of Shane are the same, in that full payment is required. So we see that according to Shane, as well as mankind, which are both described as being maveh, that Rav Papa is talking about a case here where the Av and the toldos are the same in terms of the damages and the stringency of the damages, because the Mishnah started out in the beginning and said, Rav Papa said that there are some where the Av and the toldos were similar in terms of full stringency of damage, and others where it's dissimilar, where the Av and the toldos are not the same of damage. So that's a sentence or two summary of what we've done so far. I mean, there's a lot more detail, but I hope this makes sense to you, Kevin, because you've done it before.
Yeah, a while ago. Okay, continue. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, I hope that's been helpful. So what we're saying is now, it's like, hang on a second. We've learned the Gemara and the Mishnah so far according to the mindset of Rav. So before we initially say that Shmuel doesn't make sense, we've got to understand that Rav and Shmuel agree on a certain number of points. The first thing is that both mankind as well as ox are living. This is both in line with the Mishnah. And the fact of it is that even according to Shmuel and Rav, they agree that Keren, Shane, and Regel are vastly different in terms of the animal's intent. So both Shmuel and Rav agree with that. What they're doing now is having a disagreement in terms of what category refers to which. So, according to Rav, ox has three primary categories. It's got Keren, Shane, and Regel. And what Shmuel is coming to show is that ox is the category referred to biblically, and that maveh is also a biblical category, but a category of ox. And that maveh is referring to the category of Shane of ox. Now we're going to see two different opinions. According to Shmuel's student Rav Yehuda, he's saying that where it mentions ox as the primary category in the Mishnah, Shmuel is referring to Keren, the biblical source of Keren, and Rava, not Rav, Rava, who's giving the opinion of Shmuel, is saying that the biblical version of ox is referred to as Regel. And we're going to see how these things unplay and what the consequence is. So before we have in our mind just purely about Rav, what we've got to do is see it from Shmuel's logical point of view first. Hopefully that makes sense so far. Any questions before I unpack it for you?
I'm good.
I'm good.
Okay, Art? Kev?
Okay, carry on.
Okay.
Kadima.
All right. So what's happening is Rav Yehuda was a student of Shmuel, and Gavin and I learned last night how great this man was, that when he took off his shoe, he ended off his drought because Hashem didn't want to distress Rav Yehuda, and it started to rain and ended the drought. And the drought initially was caused by Rav Yehuda, who wasn't approving of people throwing around bread. He found it respectful. So you're talking about that even if we have a criticism of Rav Yehuda's explanation, we're not having the criticism. His contemporaries or his seniors are. So we've got no right to criticize Rav, Shmuel, Rava, or Rav Yehuda. These are merely different points of view of which everyone has its merits, and everyone, we can see it from a different point of view. So let's not use the word flaws. And what we're just trying to understand is what these great men are trying to say. And when we bring Rashi and Tosfot, what we're saying is Rashi and Tosfot does not criticize them. They're merely coming to explain the Gemara according to the opinion of the other. So with that out the way, Shmuel says as follows, that ox, this is according to Rav Yehuda, his student's view of what Shmuel says. He says, Rav Yehuda says Shmuel refers to ox as the biblical reference of keren. And then because the biblical reference of keren is there, Maveh is free to refer to Shane, because he's not arguing with Rav. Again, even Rav said that the category of keren or Shane are vastly different. Why are they different? This is what the Tana is saying. The nature of keren, where the guys, there's some sort of background noise.
It's a truck. I'll switch.
Okay. So the Tana is saying as follows: the nature of keren, where there is no gratification by the animal for its damage, is not similar to the nature of Shane, where there is gratification for the animal to damage. So let's just unpack this again. Keren is any category, both the other and the tordas, the category and the subcategories, where the animal's nature is intent to damage or kill. Shane is any animal that derives physical gratification from its action, and regel has to do with the natural animal movement, be it walking, or the animal's body, or the bit in its mouth and its backpack, or its hair, etc., creating damage. So those three are vastly different. So Rav Yehuda is saying, according to Shmuel, again, ox is referring to the biblical source of keren, and Maveh is free to describe Shane, which is the tooth of the animal, which is any animal damage from physical gratification, which is fine, because as we said, that the nature of keren, where there's no gratification, because again, the animal's intent is to damage, is not similar to Shane, where there is gratification, where the animal's intent is not to damage. So basically, this is the bottom line. It also converses that with the fact that the nature of Shane does not resemble keren, and keren does not resemble Shane. They're completely different. So if one biblical source was used, or one category was used for ox, both Rav and Shmuel would agree that we could not derive the one from the other, because they're vastly different in the reasons that they damage. So where Rav says ox, under ox, the three primary categories are keren, Shane, and regel. What Shmuel is wanting to say is in the Mishnah itself, ox is referred to, according to Rav Yehuda, as keren, and Shane is referred to by Maveh. It's the living tooth of the animal for physical gratification. So at this point, all we are saying is this: according to Tosfot, we want to see why the animal intends to do damage. So what Tosfot is bringing about is as follows: because the nature of keren, where the animal doesn't have any desire for gratification, if you brought the discussion of Shane, we could never derive keren. In other words, I say to you, this is according to Tosfot, that my animal got hungry and it couldn't help itself and it wanted to eat. I can't control the animal if it suddenly gets a desire to eat or graze in your field. I don't want it to graze in your field, but how am I meant to control this animal? And initially, it's proposing, according to this part of the Gemara, that it's very difficult to control an animal that has a desire to eat. And keren, who doesn't have a desire to eat, we would think is a bit easier to predict. Then the other part of the Gemara comes across and says the following. It turns around and it says that maybe you want to say the other way around. Shane, the animal is nice and relaxed, it's chilled, and its intent is not to damage. So therefore, Tosfot is going along the same line of reasoning by saying that an animal that's not intending to damage is relatively easy to watch because it's relaxed. But when an animal wants to damage or kill, it's impossible to guard this sort of animal, because this animal is bent on doing destruction and it needs a lot of force to control the animal. So both of these are giving reasons that if you mention Shane without keren and you mention keren without Shane, we would say, how could we be obligated? Because if you came to me and you said to me, listen, your animal ate in my field, I would have said, listen, I didn't know my animal was hungry. It came to eat. I'm sorry about that. I can't predict if my animal's hungry. The same thing, you came to me and you said, listen, your animal went AWOL, it went crazy, and damaged one of my employees and damaged my ox. I would have said, well, look, I can't read the mind of my animal. The animal went crazy. How am I going to stop the animal for damaging your property? So we can never determine Shane from Karen and Karen from Shane, because if we had one and not the other, they're completely two different forms of damages, and we would never be able to deduce the one from the other. And that's exactly why, both according to Shmuel and Rav, both of them have to be mentioned. The only difference between Shmuel and Rav is mentioning the three primary categories under ox, and Shmuel says, according to Rav Yehuda, ox refers to Keren, and Shmuel refers to Marve. In terms of the damage by physical gratification. But in principle, they agree. It's just how they break up the categories is different. All right, guys, can you just let me know you've understood so far?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, great.
Kevin? Kev?
Kevin, you're on mute.
I know, because there was a truck there. That was making the noise, a truck outside. Okay, so the damage, can I ask one quick question?
Sure, of course.
So you're saying that Karen and Shane, would it be the same damages one would be liable for either of them? Because they're regarded the same.
So exactly. So what we're saying is, it's not that you're not entitled to pay for damages. What we're saying is the logic. The logic and the arguments that you and I would get into, if my ox damaged your property or if you had ate from your field, I would be able to have a counter argument. And the reason that both are listed here by both Rav and Shmuel, although they've got different opinions of where they derive it from scripturally and how it's listed in the Mishnah and the categories and the primary categories, they're in principle in agreement in many respects. And what they're saying is that if you look at Shane or Keren, so far it's a reason to exempt the person based on an excuse. Meaning, my ox grazes in your land and you say you owe me money. And I said, listen, pal, my ox is hungry. How do I know it's hungry? All of a sudden it gets an idea in its head and it starts eating. It's very difficult to control a hungry animal. And so too, I could turn around to you and when you said, listen, your ox went mad and killed my ox, I would have said, listen, this ox is coming with its horns. What did you expect me to be, a buffer? How do I control this animal? The animal went crazy. So, what do you expect me to do? I'm not expected to pay for something. I mean, I didn't make your animal go crazy. Your ox aggravated my animal. So far, according to these, we determine that these are reasons to be exempt because unless it was noted scripturally, we'd have a logical reason to exempt it. And that's exactly why it's mentioned in the Gemara that we are obligated for these payments, because on first glance, it would seem that we don't have to pay. And what the law is turning to say is, whatever your excuses are, your animal damaged another animal, whatever its reasons, and you have to pay. So this, according to Tosfot, were the two reasons given for the exemption that the person could come up with an argument, and showing that Keren is a different nature to Shane. Shane is physical gratification, and Keren is intent to damage or kill. And that you couldn't derive Keren from Shane or Shane from Regal because the animal has two completely different reasons or motivation. That's all I want to say so far. Does this make sense?
Perfect.
This is according to Rav Yehuda's explanation of Shmuel. Kevin, does this make sense? Enough?
Yeah, you explained it well.
Yeah.
Okay. How many minutes are left before we do because I do want to cover another bit of ground because
4 minutes.
It's a little bit difficult. Okay. All right. So let me just give you one or two other arguments that you need to consider. The one of the arguments is that so far we see, according to Tosfot, reasons or excuses that a person can come to exempt themselves. Now we're going to bring a slightly different argument, and that argument is say I damaged your property by accident. I borrowed it and I damaged it. And you came to me and you said to me, listen, you owe me for the thing. And I said, listen, it was accidental. I knocked something in my sleep. It's not my responsibility because I didn't do it on purpose. So that could be a reason for exemption. But what we're saying here is like, if you take a look at Karen, if I on purpose smashed your vase, for sure I'm responsible. In a case where I could say, listen, I didn't intend to do it, you could say, well, maybe he's not responsible. But in a case where I smashed it on purpose, I'm definitely responsible. So we could learn Karen even if we didn't have shame, because the intent there is in order to damage. Where shame, I could say it was accidental. Do you get what I'm saying? So the Gemara is now saying, well, maybe we can work out Karen, but we couldn't work out shame. Does that make sense so far?
Yep.
Okay. So, all right. So what we're going to do is we're going to log off from this, and we're going to redo a Zoom share and then join us seamlessly, because we need to cover a little bit of ground. It was essential that we obviously gave the share in dedication to Gavin's late mom. And the second part of the share will be joined to this in her merit, which I don't want to do tomorrow because it's in no one's merit. Does that make sense, Gav? That's why I want to just do that.
I appreciate that, yeah. And also, I think you gave a lovely summary for Kevin. Kevin, I hope it was quite clear to you. Quite a lot. It was a lot of information in one go, but it was a high-level summary. Were you okay with it?
Yeah, look, I've done some of this before, but I was off.
So, guys, let me just tell you where we ended off. We ended off by saying that we couldn't derive Keren from Shane and Shane from Keren because they were inherently different. And what we said was there are reasons to exempt on both cases, and there are reasons to obligate in both cases. Now, the reason to obligate is as follows, is because there is a instruction in the Mishnah and Gemara that we are to pay for such damages, because it would assume that people that didn't want to pay for those damages could have a response saying, I'm not prepared to pay for this particular reason. And when the law says you pay, it doesn't matter what your reason is. It's the same thing if we take a car accident and a guy said, I didn't mean to hit the back of your car. Okay, it wasn't on purpose. Well, you know what? I must tell you something. The word sorry has caused more problems than anything. Somebody thinks it's this magic word, sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get acquainted with your wife. We just had coffee and things happened. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to smack the back of your bucky and render your vehicle. And I'm not insured. I'm a minibus taxi. I'm sorry that you have to pay $6,000 excess and your work vehicle that you're delivering goods every day has rendered you useless, and you have to hire a vehicle because you can't deliver stock on your vehicle. I'm sorry seems to be a blanket word to just say, if you're really sorry and contrite, that magic word seems to say you're not responsible. And it's not true, because I tell you something. If I premeditated for a month and plotted and schemed to smash your vehicle, or I did it by not being aware and accidentally smashing your vehicle, what's the difference? I've written your vehicle off. What is the difference? So I don't know if you agree with me what I'm saying. So that sometimes the law is there to obligate those people that are trying to wangle out a payment. And they know what the excuses could be for Shane and Karen. Karen and Shane have nothing to do with each other in terms of why the animal damaged, but we're responsible in both cases so that you can't have any excuses whatsoever. So, I'm just going to read the Gemara and give you a bit of an understanding now. And we're just going to read it in a bit of a flowing way. Okay? Because I had to give you that Tosfot background. So, according to Rav Yehuda, who explains Shmuel, again, Rav said, the primary categories are ox, are Keren, Shane, and Regel. According to Shmuel, Rav Yehuda, his student's explanation of Shmuel, Keren was the primary damager of ox, as referred to by the Mishnah, and Mave referred to Shane, which in fact is similar to Rav in the sense that you can't derive Shane from Keren. They're both different reasons that the animal damages. And we're going to ask Rav Yehuda soon where he gets regel from. So, again here, according to Shmuel's view, by Rav Yehuda's opinion, the nature, and this is what the Tana is saying, the nature of Keren, from where there's no gratification derived from the animal for its damage, is not similar in nature to Shane, where there is gratification derived by the animal from its damage. Now, so if the Torah had written one is liable for Keren, we would not have been able to derive that Shane is liable as well. And the same nature Shane, where it's not the animal's intent to damage, because it's physical gratification, is not similar to the nature of Keren, where the animal's intent to do damage. So had the Torah written that one is liable for Shane, we would not have been able to derive that one is liable for Keren at all. So that's what Rav Yehuda says. Now, the Gemara objects to this logic because it says as follows. Isn't it true that you can derive a kol v'chomer argument which would seem to indicate the opposite conclusion? In other words, kol v'chomer means even more so. So what it's trying to say is, in a case of Shane, where it's not the animal's intent to damage, the law is that the owner is liable. So in a case where it's the animal's intent to damage, is it not more so that the animal is liable? Does that make sense? In other words, Shane, no intent to damage. So in a case where the animal isn't intention is to damage, you're liable by the law. In a case where the animal's intent is to damage, shouldn't you be more liable?
Yes, in theory. Yes, in theory.
Good. All right. So in theory it is, but it's not quite so clear. And I'll tell you why. You can say that of the person causing the damage itself. So if I had to say to you, Gav, I'm sorry about that. I accidentally, in my sleep, for example, knocked the vase off. I didn't know what I was doing. It wasn't my intent to do damage. Okay? And where you obligate me in that case, where I didn't intend to do it, obviously, if I came to your house, lost my temper with you, and smashed your vase off the dining room table while awake, of course I'm more responsible. And this is what the Kal V'chomer is coming to teach. That if the law makes me responsible in a case where my intention wasn't to do damage, even more so when I lost my temper, I'd be responsible for that damage. So this would seem to criticize it. And the Gemara responds, and I'm going to give this a little bit of a parable for you, is that the argument here would be something slightly different. I could say that, listen, this is not a case where I'm damaging you. This is a case where I have a property, which is an ox. I have an animal that I've bought. It's under my possession. And my ox went crazy and killed your ox because your ox was aggravating it. Now, I didn't do this on purpose to you. My ox was irritated by your ox. It went mad and killed your ox. I didn't want this for your ox. I didn't want your ox to do damage. But what did you expect me to do? Did you expect me to get between both the animals? The animal is 300 kilograms. I'm 58 k's. What did you expect me to do? Be horn fodder? I'm not gonna be impaled. Thank you very much. I didn't want the damage. So in that case, we're talking about not the actual person did the damage. For example, you're a mate of mine. I take you to a party. You get a little bit drunk, and you have an argument with somebody, and you knock their teeth out. Now, my mate phones me and says, listen, I don't have the character you brought to my house, but he knocked my mate's teeth out, and he owes money. And you know what? I can't get hold of him, so you owe money. And I said, listen, how am I going to read the mental process of my friend? He had a bit too much to drink. If you want the money, maybe get it from him. Why is it my responsibility just because I brought him to the party? You get what I'm saying? So it's different. It is slightly different in this case. So this is what the Gemara is going to respond with. It's going to say it was necessary for the Torah to explicitly state liability for Keren, the Kal V'chomer, because what we could have thought is that to say that Keren, although it is intentional damage, it is exempt from liability, similar to what we find with damage inflicted by a slave or slave woman. Okay, so let me just bring the case forward to you. So, say for example, I bought a slave. The slave itself wasn't doing his job properly, and I said to him, "Listen, I want you to shine my shoes because I've got an important event tonight, and I'm going to be in a suit." So what happened is he forgot. So 5 minutes before I was about to go out, he used shoe polish. Now, what do you think happens when you've got white smart pants and black shoes with black shoe polish? It's going to scuff and leave marks all over the white pants. So all of a sudden, I put the shoes on. Now, some of the guests have already arrived. And I turned around to Ahmed and said, you're a moron. I asked you to do this morning. We're cleaning the shoes. Now, everything's got scuff marks, and you were lazy or you were a moron, one or the two. And I scream at him in public. Now, this guy, he can't do anything by the law, but he's going to say, you know what? That's fine. I'll be embarrassed now. Wait, China. I'm gonna smash you up 6 ways from Sunday. You know what I'm going to do? Your neighbor has a Ferrari. And we know that you have one slave. He has 100. You don't have much money. So you know what we're going to do? I'm going to key his car. I'm going to throw a brick through his window. I'm going to smash his paintwork. And by the time I'm finished, it's going to cost you 50 grand. And we know we haven't made your insurance premium last night because we heard you on the phone to the insurance company saying, listen, I'll sort out your premium. I kind of forgot about it, and I know you're not covered. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to cost you 50 grand. You think your shoes were expensive? You think the white pants were expensive? Wait, China, I'm going to fix you. And then what happens then is the slave smashes the neighbor's Ferrari, and the Ferrari, the neighbor comes to you and says that now your property, because a slave was somebody's property, they owned him. Let's not get into the issue of slavery yet. That's a discussion on its own about how somebody can become a slave, et cetera, et cetera. But for the principle's sake, the neighbor's going to turn around and say, listen, that's your property that damaged. Whether it was your ox that did the damage or your slave, that both belong to you. And therefore, I want my 50 or 100 grand for smashing my Porsche. And then Ahmed's going to rub his hands together and say, yeah, China, you'll think twice before you embarrass me in public. Okay? And that's why there's an exemption. So the Bava Kamma notwithstanding to say, in a case of Keren, where the owner is more liable if he did it on purpose than Shane where it was accidental, we're saying, hang on a second, but a person's property, the Bava Kamma notwithstanding has an exemption clause, and the exemption clause is as follows. If your slave or slave woman does damage, in order to incur costs by you because they're angry at you, there is an exemption clause. Because what would happen is that there's always this tenuous relationship between the master and the slave, where the slave hates working for the master and will think of ways to be passive-aggressive. In other words, what do we mean by passive-aggressive? Very nice to the master. Yes, sir. No, sir. And in the back of his head, I'm going to cost you 50 grand, sir. This is, in fact, the nature. And that's why there's a special exemption clause that says that a slave, if a slave is your property and does damage, you are not liable. So we could think, according to this logic, that since an ox is a person's property, if my ox gets this idea into its head to smash your ox, it's also not liable because, again, the slave is my property, my ox is my property, my slave damages your property. It's as Rav Ashi said, that the slave might end up costing his master 100 manners a day, and my ox might damage yours and cause a cost to you. So therefore we could say, if we exempt in the case of our property being our slave or slave woman causing damage, so too we might have thought with Keren that we exempt if our ox, which is our property, does damage with intent to damage as well. So what I'm saying is now Rav Ashi is gonna bring a reason why this does not apply here. So far, have what I said to all three of you make sense?
Yeah, clear.
Yeah. Arthur? Okay. So Rav Ashi now is bringing a case of saying, listen, these two cases are fundamentally different. An ox, when it intends to do damage, it's not plotting and scheming every day, resentful of its master to try and cause issues. An ox damages for the simple intent of being irritated, and therefore the two cases have nothing to do with each other. We might have said that a slave or slave woman is a person's property, and there's an exemption on damage so as not to cost his master money. And therefore we're saying an ox is a person's property, and if it intends to damage it, shouldn't cost its owner money. But according to Rav Ashi, there's two separate reasons for this. And the reason is Rav Ashi said that a slave intends to damage its master. Nobody wants to work for somebody else with being forced to do it, so it's going to get punitive. Whereas an ox damages for a different reason. It's irritating. So the kol v'chomer, the exemption for the kol v'chomer doesn't apply, and therefore the argument reasserts itself. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah. Can I just add something that might actually also help? Is that with a slave, it's intentional, and with an animal, it's instinctive.
Yes, is 100% right. And the word I would use is the one has a premeditated intention to damage its master, where the other is almost instinctual to stop that which is irritating it. And Gavin is 100% correct. And in fact, in the merit of your mom, I wish to bring a question that Gavin brought last time in my discussion with him privately, which I think is a brilliant question. And it was brought about by Pnei Yeshua. Tosfot also brings this out, is we say, well, then I could turn around as a slave master and say, listen, my neighbor, both you and I don't like him because, he tries to get you to clean his car for free and you don't work for him and he doesn't treat you well and I don't like him. He's not a particularly nice guy. So I tell you what I want you to do. I'm going to give you 4,000 Rand bonus this month, and what I want you to do is clean his Ferrari. Or I want you to put hydraulic acid on his Ferrari. By the next day, the paint will strip. We don't dig him. Could you do with an extra 4 grand? Right? And the reason I say this is, that if you damage, I'm not responsible. You know that. So let's do this. Let's plot against that. And this is a question Gavin asked me. Do you remember, Gavin, in the honor of your mom? I think it's something that we should bring because it's a brilliant question. So this is one of the things that are brought into the fore, is that how do we prevent this sort of thing? Well, the reality is what you had there is a shavua. You have an oath. It's not, if you have a look at modern law, what people do is they swear on a Bible that they're telling the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And this comes from Talmudic law where we do a shavua, an oath in Hashem's name. Now today you've got criminal gangsters and mafia and they'll swear using the name of God and all sorts of things that they're innocent and they're tzaddikim when in fact they're murderers and thieves. But in those days, the Jewish people that took an oath were very scared. And I'll prove today that they're even scared to do the same thing. You must know that if you say somebody says they don't believe in God, and you say, listen, I want you to sell me your olam haba in a contract, and to sign the contract and to swear on the Torah that you're prepared to do it and sign for it, and I'll give you 100,000 Rand. They'd be nervous, even though they love the money and they're not sure they believe in God. They don't want to lose their olam haba for 100 grand. This is what Rabbi Yosef Mizrahi said, because they don't want to swear in, and they're not sure, so they wouldn't want to get a financial payment for their olam haba. So the reason we bring this is that both the slave and the master have to bring an oath. I'm pretty sure, I'm not 100% sure, that in fact, the master never put the slave up to this, and the slave did it of his own volition. And because both of them, even if Ahmed didn't care about taking an oath in vain, the Jewish person would be terrified to use Hashem's name in vain and swear that he never put his slave up to it. And these were big deterrents. It's not like today where people don't fear Hashem. There they feared Hashem. And their shavua an oath counts. It really, really counts, and people were terrified to transgress that. So that's one thing we have to bear in mind. Just one other note is that the reason why a slave doesn't have payback is if he had any money, he wouldn't be a slave, because everything that a slave owns belongs to his master. If a slave is his master's property, then anything that's the property of his property belongs to his master. And if you want to take a case of a Jewish slave became a slave to his master because he stole from his master and never had, or he stole from the guy. And at that point, he never had the money to pay back. So he's paying back his labor in terms of the money that he owes. And therefore, whatever belongs to the slave, whether Jewish or not Jewish, belongs to his master because he has no assets. Why do you think he got indentured in the first place? Okay. So this is what we're talking about in this particular case. So the question reasserts itself. Why was it necessary for the Torah to state liability for Keren when this can be deduced from a shame? Because now that the Kol V'chomer with the exemption has fallen away, we have to deal with this. So then rather the Mishnah means as follows, that the nature of Keren, which the animal's intent to damage, is not similar at all to the nature of shame, where the animal's intent is not to damage, is different to the animal's intent of shame, where the animal is gaining physically. There's physical gratification that is not similar to Keren, where the animal does not gain physical gratification. So Keren, where the animal's intent is to damage or kill, is completely different from shame, where the animal's intent is to get physical gratification. If we didn't have a source for shame, and we didn't have a source for Keren, we could not derive one from the other, because people would use excuses to get out of it. I couldn't control my animal from eating. I couldn't control it from creating damage. And because both those things, people use excuses, the law comes to bring that you're obligated if your animal causes damage, no matter what. And that's why these two cases were brought into the fore. Arthur, do you have any idea how much time we have left?
Oh, because it's not telling me yet. So we've still got time. I just don't know how long it is.
Okay.
It's more than 10.
Fine. So I want to end off on this note, because what we're going to discuss, just hang on a second. No. I don't want to end off on this note. We can add a little bit of something just quickly, and then we're going to have a perfect conclusion. You can edit this 2 seconds of confusion out. All right. So now what we're going to do is, according to Rav Yehuda's opinion, there is one thing that wasn't mentioned, and that was the case of Regel. So we said Rav Yehuda's explanation of his master Shmuel was as follows, is that ox has to do, in the 4 categories of the Mishnah, ox has to do with Keren, the biblical source of Keren, and Maveh has to do with the biblical source of shame. So what happened to Regel? So the Gemara responds, according to Rav Yehuda, when the Mishnah says, in the beginning of the Mishnah, it says when it damages, the damager is obligated, is superfluous. So I just want to bring the initial part of the Mishnah, and I want to share the screen for 1 second.
Okay. In Hebrew or English? Or okay.
English. The Mishnah concludes.
The Mishnah concludes. The characteristic common to all of them is that their way is to damage, and the obligation for watching them is upon you, the owner.
Excellent.
And when, continue?
Yes.
And when, if any one of these damages does damage, the owner of the damager is obligated to make payment for the damage with the choicest of land.
Excellent. So what it wants to bring here is it's bringing a case from Rav Yehuda, according to Shmuel, and it says, okay, Rav Yehuda, I would like to know from you where you bring the case of Regel, because we left out Regel. So we need to know when you did. Again, we brought ox in connection with Keren, and then we brought Maveh in connection with shame. But what do you say Shmuel brought in terms of Regel? Because both Rav and Shmuel has got a scriptural source for Regel, and it has to be mentioned. So this is where it says it's mentioned. It has a superfluous meaning where it says, And when any of these damages does damage, the owner of the damager is obligated to make payment for the damage with the choicest of land. Now look at this. It says does damage, make payment for the damage. The owner of the damage is obligated to make payment for the damage. It mentions damage more than once. What it could say is something completely different. It could turn around and say, when any of these damages does damage, why are you saying these damages does damage? If it's a damage, it does damage. You don't have to mention it again. Does that make sense? So it's saying that extra word does damage is coming to refer to regel. Okay? And this, I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. Okay? So, the Gemara has a slight problem with it. And the problem is as follows. I'm going to bring it now. It says, why don't you mention it explicitly? Meaning, initially, this Gemara was mentioned on 9b. In other words, it goes through it in 9b. This is just where it's brought up initially, by the way. So it says, how can you teach regel as just like a subcategory? Why can't you just say it outright, that regel is regel? Why do you have to say the damager and the damage? Because you're taking an extra word, but how do we know that when the Mishnah says when it damages, the damager is obligated? You could just say when it damages, he is obligated. You interpreting the extra word damager to mean regel. So we can interpret it as anything. What makes you think it's regel? And the reality is we say that the nature of regel, whose damage is common, is not similar to the nature of Shein, whose damage is not common. Because again, nature of regel, it's the natural way an animal walks and moves, etc. The gratification of Shein is not similar to regel. So according to that, we need to have a damager for regel because it's a different reason animal damages. But what we're saying is that it's a bit of a problem because the Gemara doesn't like the fact that it's not mentioning, regel outright, and it's just insinuating. So the Mishnah is abandoning Rav Yehuda's explanation of Shmuel, and it says, hang on a second, Rav has got a different explanation of Shmuel. So Rav was also a student of Shmuel. And what he's saying is as follows, is that when the Mishnah taught the word ox, ox, it's saying in reference to foot. It's not saying in reference to keren. Remember we learned that biblical source, Gavin and Arthur, about the foot and the regel. So what Rav is saying that Shmuel's referring to that. And when it taught Mave, it's referring to the biblical reference to Shein. Remember how it joined those two together, leading the ox into the field, the ox went in the field, etc. So in this case, it says, okay, but then you're still left with the same problem. What's the problem? The problem is, what do we do? What do you do with keren? Where's keren found? And it says the same thing. It says there's an extra word, and that word is when the Mishnah says when it damages, the damager is obligated, and that extra word damager is superfluous. It comes to mean keren. So what the Gemara says is, well, Rav Yehuda said the same thing. Why didn't you mention it explicitly? Why just hint to it? And he said, I'll tell you why. There's a very good reason. Because the Mishnah is only talking about cases that are moored from the outside. In other words, a pit, a fire, regel, and Shein are full payment damages from the outset. And therefore the Mishnah only discusses that. It doesn't discuss half damages of keren. That's a different issue that's covered in 9b. So keren is only hinted to here. But the Gemara, the Mishnah is only talking about full payment damages. So the Gemara liked that answer and said, okay, well, there's a logical reason that keren is not mentioned here. So it's sticking to Rava as far as this is concerned. Does that make sense, guys?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we're going to end on this note.